Good morning. My name is Kassandra Frederique. I am the New York State Director at Drug Policy Alliance. Drug Policy Alliance is a national organization working to end the war on drugs. While we do focus on ending marijuana prohibition, our goal is wholesale. We need to end the drug war for all drugs, and recognizing that prohibition in any way is not getting us any closer to health, and it's not getting us any closer to public safety. I think most of the Assembly members know that I tend to freestyle and speak from my mind. I think I might be a policy rapper. But today, this is super important to me, and with the help of my staff, Deputy State Director Melissa Moore, and our new father on staff, Policy Coordinator Chris Alexander, prepared my comments today, so I'm going to respect them by sticking to the script. The momentum for reforming marijuana enforcement in New York is undeniable, as recent polls indicate. New Yorkers across the state have clearly signaled they do not want people to continue to be arrested for marijuana, with more than 2/3 of New Yorkers supporting legalizing marijuana for adult use and using revenue from taxing and regulating marijuana to address the $4.4 billion budget deficit in New York. Ending marijuana prohibition and taxing and regulating marijuana for adult use in New York is smart for our communities, for racial justice, and for our state's economy. The evidence, which you will hear today, is clear, and New York legislators face a crucial decision. Following Attorney General Jeff Sessions rescinding the Cole memo, which previously instructed the Department of Justice to allow states to implement their own marijuana laws with limited federal interference, New York must decide whether we acquiesce to the Trump administration or stand up and fight for progressive values, as Governor Cuomo and other New York legislatures have pledged to do with regard to immigration, labor, civil rights, education, and environmental concerns in the face of damaging federal policy. Just this week, immediately on the heels of Attorney General's announcement, Vermont's Senate approved a legislation bill, and New Hampshire's House voted to legalize marijuana, issuing a direct rebuke to the return to the war on drugs mentality that contributed significantly to mass incarceration, and has hugely detrimental impacts on New York. More than 800,000 people alone have been arrested across New York in the last 20 years. Despite the state legislature, shout out to Assemblyman Richard Gottfried, passing the marijuana decriminalization bill, including the more than 23,000 arrests for marijuana possession alone in 2016. Clearly, marijuana decriminalization has failed New Yorkers. These arrests also are extremely racially biased. Although drug use occurs at similar rates across racial and ethnic groups, Black and Latino individuals are arrested for possessing marijuana at vastly disproportionate rates. In 2016, more than 85% of those arrested for marijuana possession were Black and Latino. Nearly 70% of those arrested were under 30, and over a third were under the age of 21. I want to stop here and add that as a Black New Yorker, I want to be very clear that Black New Yorkers in Manhattan, in which I reside, were arrested more than all the white people in the rest of the 5 boroughs. I want to say that again. Black people that live in Manhattan were arrested. There were more numbers of those people than all the white people arrested in New York City. Full stop. Many New Yorkers don't know that the state decriminalized marijuana possession 40 years ago, and that law is still on the books. They are unaware, primarily because more than 60 people on average are arrested every day for marijuana possession in New York State, making marijuana possession one of the top arrests in the state. These arrests have been largely justified by a loophole left in the law allowing police officers to distinguish between public and private possession. Because possession in public view remains a crime, this loophole, coupled with pervasive and racially biased over-policing of certain neighborhoods, has resulted in continued mass arrests for personal possession of marijuana despite decriminalization. In New York, marijuana decriminalization has fallen short and will continue to do so. It has not succeeded in curbing the costs or the harms of prohibition, and has instead made the need for reform clearer. The failure of decriminalization is most evident in New York City. In 2014, then Police Commissioner Bill Bratton issued a statement in coordination with Mayor de Blasio that instructed NYPD officers to no longer make an arrest when they had discovered marijuana on a person in course of a search. The accompanying police instruction, Order 43, represented a clarification of the existing law to law enforcement. This policy change represented a visible shift from NYPD's previous practices and signaled the potential for the increased efficacy of New York's 1977 decriminalization statute. However, the result has been much more of the same. In 2015, arrests dropped significantly, but 2016 saw those numbers increase once again. More importantly, although arrests have been generally reduced from their 2014 levels, the racial disparities in who is being arrested has remained consistent, with more than 8 in 10 of those arrested being Black and Latino. Again, despite similar rates of usage across all ethnic groups. Legalizing marijuana is also imperative because of the state's medical marijuana program. Thanks again, Assemblymember Dick Gottfried, is currently falling far short of the patient's needs. The New York State Legislature passed the Compassionate Care Act in 2014, making New York the 23rd state to legalize medical marijuana. But the program has struggled to provide the type of care that was promised. Despite recent efforts to improve New York's medical marijuana program, including adding newly added qualifying conditions and additional registered dispensaries, many patients continue to lack access to medical marijuana for the treatment of a variety of approved qualifying conditions and the conditions that may not have been included in the medical marijuana program. The challenges patients are facing in accessing medical marijuana are threefold. Geographic limitations created by the state in allowing very few medical marijuana dispensaries, difficulty in finding a practitioner who is certified to recommend medical marijuana to a patient, and the current unaffordability of medical marijuana under the program. While the number of approved licenses and approved locations has increased, a list of registered doctors has been made available. Patients are still unable to access the program fully due to the astronomical cost of the medicine. New York is facing a crisis of overdose deaths, and it is not lost on us that some might criticize calls for marijuana legalization amid this moment. However, a growing body of research is pointing to how access to legal marijuana markets, including medical marijuana and recreational adult use, has been associated with significantly lowering deaths among opioid deaths than in states without legal marijuana sources. Data from a study published in the Journal of American Medical Association shows a 25% drop in deadly overdoses, resulting in 1,700 fewer deaths in 2010 alone. Pointing to marijuana as a potential tool for people struggling to end opioid use. Studies have also shown that patients see marijuana as a viable alternative to prescription opioid pain medication, with fewer side effects and lower potentials for problematic use. Given marijuana's pain-relieving benefits, it presents a promising solution to reducing the risk for misuse, dependence, overdose associated with opioid use. Marijuana alone will not be the answer to New York's problem with opioid misuse and overdose deaths. But available evidence indicates that it should be used with other harm reduction strategies as part of a necessarily diverse and innovative approach to combating this crisis. I want to be clear that the principal reason we support legalizing marijuana is because marijuana prohibition continues to be used as a justification for massive violations of civil and human rights in New York. The more than 800,000 arrests that have taken place across New York in the last 20 years are not a trivial matter. They involve being handcuffed, placed in police cars, taken to the police station, fingerprinted, photographed, possibly being held in jail for up to 24 hours while awaiting arraignment before a judge, appearing in court several times over the course of months, and conclude with the imposition of a permanent criminal record that can be easily found on the internet by employers, landlords, schools, credit agencies, and banks. New Yorkers who are arrested often face immediate and long-term consequences that can make it difficult to get a job and to keep a job, maintain a professional license, obtain educational loans, secure housing, or even keep custody of a child or adopt. Furthermore, and most importantly to me as someone who has been born in New York, marijuana is consistently used as a justification for law enforcement interactions with vulnerable communities, and only vulnerable because of the color of our skin, and provides pretext for law enforcement to over-police communities of color with all too often tragic outcomes. We need real policy change to end marijuana policing that can lead to these horrific and in some cases deadly outcomes. The recent indictment of 2 NYPD detectives for raping and kidnapping an 18-year-old woman they arrested for allegedly possessing a small amount of marijuana following an unnecessary search as a woman sat in her parked car illustrates the dramatic harm that can result from continued marijuana arrests. As does the death of Wayne Henderson, a 25-year-old who was found to have violated parole over marijuana possession and who died in custody at Rikers Island in 2017 while awaiting sentencing. Data gathered by the Legal Aid Society's Parole Revocation Defense Unit show that marijuana was involved in more than 20% of parole violation charges in New York City in the first half of 2017. In these cases, alleged use of marijuana was charged and played a major factor in the parole violation case and a client's continued detention in the parole violation. In some cases, use of marijuana is the sole charge for violation of parole, which can result in a significant time in custody. In a moment that all New York City elected officials are calling for closing Rikers, you can't have that conversation without talking about removing marijuana as a reason for someone's probation or parole to be violated. The dire need for reform is also illustrated by the tragic death of Mario Sanabria, a 69-year-old Bronx resident who was killed by NYPD officers in December as they were serving a no-knock warrant for marijuana on someone who was not at the residence. Sanabria was a caretaker for his 92-year-old brother-in-law and initially thought the officers bursting through the door were burglars attacking the home. This is not just happening in New York City. There is a senseless death of Wardell Davis in Buffalo, who died while being taken into custody by Buffalo PD for allegedly possessing marijuana, although none was found following an investigation. Something similar happened in the Bronx, associated with Ramarley Graham, who originally was reported as being in possession of marijuana, who was killed, whose Constance Malcolm is consistently asking for the accountability of the officers and for records to be released. And the case of Joel Guerrero and many other non-citizen immigrants who now face deportation because of an arrest for low-level marijuana possession years ago. This points to the larger issue of simple marijuana possession being the 4th most common offense among people who were deported nationally, and the most common offense among people deported with drug law violations. Just this year, we have seen that New Yorkers may face deportation for marijuana misdemeanors, regardless of how old a conviction may be, and that plainclothes ICE officers have greatly expanded their efforts and now showing up to courtrooms to arrest immigrants 900% more than in previous years. Further, the mere presence of marijuana is used to justify removing a child from their home by the Administration of Child Services, as happened with Kalisa Stapleton, whose daughter was removed from her custody for months following a false marijuana possession arrest. Attorneys from Brooklyn Defender Services Family Defense Practice have also spoken publicly about a recent case, which is emblematic of many others, where a mother was drug tested without notice while giving birth, and a small trace of marijuana was found in her system. Her child was removed, and though she has him back, she is now subject to 12 months of invasive surveillance, despite no evidence of abuse or neglect of the child. We recognize that New York does not operate in a vacuum. Governor Cuomo and many other state senators and assembly members, as well as elected officials across the state, have publicly vowed to fight the Trump administration to protect New Yorkers' rights when it comes to immigration, women's rights, civil liberties. But the above cases show that without really ending marijuana prohibition, which leads to these law enforcement abuses, their words ring hollow. In a moment when the federal administration continuously propagates outright lies and half-truths, we need those who claim to be allies of the most vulnerable New Yorkers to pass legislation to tax and regulate marijuana so we can end the marijuana arrest crusade and focus on building up our state instead of destroying lives.